All right, let's begin our fourth and final part of our vocabulary term series. This is again chapter 6. We're looking at America and society in transition. Our last one was number 27, as you can see in the background there. And so we have 2 more slides, 4 or 5 more vocabulary terms, and we will be done. So let's begin. Our first term on this slide is reservation. And as I wait for my drawing to start, there we go. We're ready to go now. Reservation. These are lands where the natives were moved to. Any area where the American Indians and Native Americans were rounded up and moved to, that is referred to as a reservation. The first reservation was essentially the state of Oklahoma. And the Indians that were east of the Mississippi River as part of the Indian Removal Act of the 1830s, we talked about in a previous video. The Cherokee Trail of Tears, they were essentially moved to what is now Oklahoma. And then eventually more reservations were opened up. Once oil was discovered in Oklahoma, those lands were taken from the natives, given to the companies to pump the oil out, and other reservations were created. But that's what a reservation is. These are lands where the natives were moved to. Usually they were smaller and not considered to be a prime land. So if the Indians had been farmers or they had relied upon fishing, the lands they were moved to probably didn't allow that, and they became dependent upon the government. The federal government promised food, blankets, and seed, but this usually clashed. This usually went directly opposed to, usually clashed what the natives' customs were, and since most natives were not farmers, they had problems. Most natives were hunters. So we go back to this concept that the reservations were usually not considered to be prime land, and the government promised to take care of the Indians, the Native Americans. They would give them food and blankets and blah, blah, blah. But again, the bulk of these Indian tribes were not farmers, they were hunters. Or if they were farmers, and there were a few, particularly along the East Coast, there were a few of the Native Indians who did make some of their living or grow a lot of their own food. But because of the land they were moved to, which was not very good farmland, they became dependent upon the government, and that was the whole idea. Nativism, not all these terms are in order. Nativism is the belief in limiting immigration. Again, if you believe in nativism, then you're probably a nativist. And of course, a nativist is one of the vocabulary terms that we had previously. The idea of nativism, a nativist is a person who is opposed to immigration because they find that the immigrants coming in do not fit well into the current state of America as it was at that time. Do we have nativists to this day? Yeah, we do. By and large today, most people who are opposed with immigration are opposed with the illegal immigration that we see so often today, as opposed to just immigration as a whole. By and large, most people today have no problems with immigration. Their problem is with the illegal immigration and the large amounts of money spent on illegal immigrants to house them, to feed them, to clothe them, to educate them, to take care of them medically, and on and on and on. Anyway, so nativism is that concept. If you believe in nativism, you're a nativist, and that was one of our previous vocabulary terms. You are opposed to immigration because you felt the people coming to America did not fit in well to the American culture. Let's go to our next and last slide. Number 30, the shortcomings of the Dawes Act. And of course, the Dawes Act was a new way in which we, the American government, dealt with the Native Americans. And we're going to look at part of the reasons why it was a failure, really, and then part of the definition as well. Let's look at letter A. It threatened tribal ways. The assimilation of Native American into American culture threatened Native culture. The Dawes Act encouraged individual farm ownership, which opposed the tradition of sharing tribal lands. So again, part of the definition of the Dawes Act was to treat the Native Americans as individuals as opposed to treating them as a group, almost as if each tribe were a separate entity, a separate nation, if you will. And so because of this, because of encouraging individual farm ownership as opposed to the traditional sharing of tribal lands, this threatened the Indian way of life, which of course was one of the shortcomings of the Dawes Act. Letter B, most Indians, most Native Americans were hunters and not farmers, though yeah, there were some. But the bulk of them relied upon hunting as their main way to survive. And since many Native tribes had never farmed ever before, they were primarily hunters or they were gatherers. I mean, there would be berries and other things that would grow wild. They would, pick and eat as well. But they were primarily hunters. And this was not only by tradition, but as a lifestyle. I mean, this is how they lived from generation to generation, century after century. And the Dawes Act was attempting to change that tradition from being hunters to becoming farmers, and or to make the Native Americans dependent upon the federal government for their very existence. Letter C, infertile land. Now this kind of goes hand in hand. The infertile land goes hand in hand with the concept that the land that they were given, which is on the previous page in the reservation, this was not prime land. This is not the best land. Let me clean this up a little bit so we can see that better. The land wasn't very good. Oklahoma, which again was the really first major reservation, largest reservation at that time, Oklahoma is horrible. I mean, if you want to be a farmer, Oklahoma is not where you go. So the lands that were given to the natives were often infertile. I mean, you couldn't grow anything on them. The government never provided farm equipment or assistance in learning how to farm. Here you take these hunters, men who, from the moment they could really walk, they learned how to use a bow and an arrow, or maybe a rifle, depending on several factors. But they were hunters. They were warriors. And now you throw them out in the middle of nowhere and say, okay, here's some seed, become a farmer. We never showed them how. We gave them poor land, and we never taught them how to be a farmer. They were doomed from the very beginning. Finally, reservation life. The reservations, because they were in poor land. They were built on poor land. The land was inhospitable. It wasn't fertile enough to grow anything. There wasn't enough game there for them to hunt, whether it be buffalo or turkeys or whatever the case may be. Because of the poor quality of land they were forced to live on, often under military rule, the reservation suffered from malnutrition, poverty, and untreated health problems. Reservation schools provided an inferior education. Now, again, we did provide an education, but it was inferior to those being given to other Americans around the country. So we essentially rounded up an entire race of people, Native Americans, put them on these reservations that were not suitable for farming, were not suitable for hunting, and we made the Native Americans dependent upon the government for food. When we did educate them, what little that was done, it was poor quality. We essentially doomed them to failure from the very beginning. Our last one, the American Indian Citizenship Act. This law granted immediate U.S. citizenship to all natives born in the United States. Again, kind of a movement away under the American Indian Citizenship Act, compiled with the Dawes Act here. Those two, American Indian Citizenship Act and the Dawes Act, what they did essentially was alter forever the Native American culture. We made the Indians U.S. citizens. We destroyed their way of life by changing their tribal ways and customs. We made them farmers when they were always been hunters. We gave them land that was incapable of growing anything, and the reservations we put them on destroyed their way of living. So from the very beginning, it is as if the American government was intending to wipe out, to destroy the Native Americans through the reservation system, through the passage of laws. Let me clean this up a little bit. The passage of laws. Okay. Like the Dawes Act and the American Indian Citizenship Act. Okay. We're done. We have just completed chapter 6 in the Jarrett book.